Catus Maximus here. Going to take a quick break from pry bars just to do a quick review and comparison of the Maasdam 2-ton Pow'r-Pull come-alongs. These are otherwise known commonly as hand winches. I figured I'd do a review of the Maasdam because those are what you can traditionally consider the better brand. They're not the best brand of these winches, but certainly much better than many import winches, otherwise known as come-alongs. And it's evident, they get pretty good reviews online, although they're not 100% perfect. Really, with come-alongs, you got to keep them oiled and not let them get too rusty, and not, the nature of these devices is either when a car is stuck or you're trying to move some piece of equipment or something like that. And oftentimes when you're getting them set up, they're, sliding around on the ground and getting dirt in them. So you really want to try to get that dirt back out of these. And I thought it would also be nice to do this review because I have one newer model and then I have one more vintage model. And so we're going to be able to compare. There's been a few comments I read on forums about people talking about how much cheaper seeming the newer generation one is. And so I thought we'd go ahead and compare a newer generation versus the more older traditional unit. First, I'll go and demonstrate general operation here. These are literally hand crank winches. You have a big long handle here. This would be the more vintage American-made unit, but we'll compare that in a second here. And what you have is you have a ratchet on the handle, and then inside, down here at the bottom, you have a second ratchet, and that's what holds the wheel. So as you ratchet and put tension on it, this handle will ratchet up, put tension, and then when you go backwards, this pawl will hold the load while you're ratcheting backwards. And so one common kind of confusion with these pullers is when they're all activated and ready to go, is people having trouble releasing them and actually getting them to untether or unspool. And so on these Maasdams, the reversing lever isn't a lever, it's a band of sheet metal, and I'll talk about the issues with that in a minute. But on these, you would push that piece of sheet metal down and it causes this ratchet pawl to go ahead and stay permanently lifted. So now that handle's not interfering. And then what you would do is you would just simply, you would push this to release the pawl, and then you would go ahead and unspool the cable, just like so. And then when you want to start ratcheting, you would put this back up. You just go ahead and release that, it automatically engages, and then now you're going ahead and ratcheting up the come-along. Man, that was kind of a slow demonstration. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about some of the features on these, and some of the differences and issues that I have. Let's get them both side by side. And first, we'll just talk about the reverse mechanism. We can see on the older generation that they have one big solid piece of steel, and then they have a second pawl. It's actually a really nice heavy-duty setup. Let me get a little closer here. And you can see on the second generation one, it's still a nice heavy-duty pawl, but it's just simply not quite as nice and robust of a mechanism, even though they do have a thicker reverse spring. So my issue with the reverse springs on both these is they use this piece of sheet metal, and you actually just have to press on it with your finger. And I've been cut a couple times in situations where you're trying to get it to reverse, your finger slides off, and it's actually pretty darn sharp. It's really not a very good idea. The other issue with this kind of pawl is as you reverse it back and forth, one of these, this will eventually fatigue on you and snap, and that could cause you harm, and it will certainly be frustrating because of the way you have to fold it over on itself. And I wish they just would have used something more standard like a clock spring. And so as you press it, you kind of have to press it hard. You have to press it in the front. If you don't press it, you can't really even get your finger in the back part. So it's always a little weird operating the reverse mechanisms on these. And the same thing goes for this one. Even though it's a little wider, it's a much stiffer one. So it's not really a whole lot easier to operate that ratchet lift. And let me actually add another addendum. And I totally forgot that about these come-alongs. And this is true, including one that I'm going to compare these to, and I just totally forgot about that. When you have this pawl up, there's a little spring load right there. So what happens is if you move this handle all the way back, and against that, you can do this. And in one motion, now unfurl it while being able to hold onto this handle and the bottom part. And I did forget to mention that. If you bring the handle all the way back, that will also force that pawl to become disengaged. And due to the nature of the spring, it doesn't allow this spring to automatically reset itself, which is kind of a nice feature. And I did want to mention that. So you can either hold it manually by your hand, or you can just move the handle all the way back. So the second comparison on these, and let's get back zoomed in here, would be the quality of the shackles, which is one thing I did read about. We can see on the original American-made one, we have Forged USA. They're nice, pretty thick shackles. There's a nice thick buckle. Now if we look at the newer generation one, you can see that it isn't a nice thick taper. These are physically lighter weight. They are probably rated just about the same, but not quite as overrated. And you can also see that the buckle isn't quite as thin. But you really do notice that where this is just a traditional tapered body shackle. This one has this weird, just totally flat area. And they're custom made. They say Maasdam on them now. And what do they say on the back? Since 1946. But I don't know if those shackles are actually American made anymore. Another thing I did want to point out is on these original units, besides the nice gold silk screening on the plastic handle, they did have their name and manufacturer stamped on both sides, as we can see. And they also had a nice up-down stamp there, which makes it just a little bit simpler, and it's a little bit nicer. I did want to point out on this one that we don't have any of that kind of stuff. We don't have any stamping. They have a safety sticker on there now that says Made in USA, and then some light embossing on the handle itself. The third thing I was going to mention about the newer one versus the older one is related to how you're dragging it across the ground. Getting dirt, particularly because you're holding it this direction, using the handle, and it's kind of dragging back and forth. Most of the ones that I've seen were like this, where this is kind of tucked inward, so when that happens, it doesn't quite turn into a shovel and just start filling itself with tons of dirt. And what I didn't understand is on the newer generation one, they didn't do that bevel. It is now cups that actually stick downwards. It actually is going to act like a cheese grater, and if you drag this across the dirt, it'll just fill itself up. It'll just take out a big clod of dirt and just pack it all in there. And the real reason all that dirt becomes issues is because it builds up in the ratchet teeth here, and then the ratchet pawls don't sit all the way down. And then if you have a situation where one of these slips, that can be a real dangerous situation. Another thing to be wary of is these are often used in extrication, and what people don't realize is that like a stuck vehicle can actually require a whole lot of force to get unstuck, much more than the weight of the vehicle. And so you always want to be real careful operating these, because it can be pretty easy to overload them. And one of the last things I wanted to mention is that you can't unwind the cable all the way. You have to have 3 to 5 windings. I generally recommend 5 wraps around the spool is the minimum, so that the cable doesn't want to come off the spool or even cause the spool to have any kinds of issues. And last but not least, let's go and compare this to one that I like a little bit better. Is this one. This is actually still a double strung where you have a shackle. One thing you can do on these is actually readjust this whole setup and just use it without the rolling shackle, without the double loop, and that will reduce the pulling force by half, but of course give you twice as much cable. This is a compact one, and these are used in a variety of situations. And I did want to show just a difference in build, design, and quality. Even though I like the Maasdam where they pinch and then they run a bolt through, on this one they have a full frame structure, and then you can see where they double layer it. They use a solid steel shackle at the end here, which I also really like. I like that it's chrome, which is nice. I like that the lower cage, that in this case holds the spring, is full width, and so all the bolts go through it, so it just adds more structure to it. Another thing about complaining about that reversing or that ratchet pawl lift mechanism, I should say, is on a little bit better one like this. It's super simple. It's just a switch. You just flip the switch to go up and down. And I thought, my goodness, Maasdam could really improve on this, because there's nothing simpler than just a switch. And then this is, of course, the same design, where if you move the handle all the way forward, it'll depress on this little spring lever and release the holding pawl. But one thing that I thought was much also in a design improvement is on these Maasdams, when you want to release the pawl, you have to press forward on it. If you're not, for whatever reason, you're not using the method where you're bringing the handle all the way back, you have to push forward on that lever and then pull this way. So you're pushing on the lever that way, and then you're trying to pull on the puller this way. It can make it a bit funky, and your finger will slip off and it will stop, and it can be kind of frustrating. Or on this one, it makes total sense. The lever, you press that way and you pull that way. So you can just grab the hook, grab that lever, and then just yank. So that was just to compare what a little bit more modern of a design can mean a whole lot of difference in ease of use on one of these manual winches. Anyway, that was just a quick review and comparison of come-alongs or manual winches. I really appreciate everybody watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Catus Maximus out.